a lot of experience in this field, and she was, we had Christine present to the STAO counselor types and committees and so forth about a year ago, and I was at that session. I said, man, we got to get this lady back for the STAO conference. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Christine and take over.
Hi. Can everyone hear me? Yes? So today we're going to talk a little bit about the power of social media, and before I start, I'll tell you a little bit about me. I am currently a consultant working at a public relations firm called Beyaert. I work almost exclusively in healthcare and science public relations, so I actually come from a scientific background. I worked initially for the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food on Parliament Hill and dealt with things like avian influenza and mad cow disease, which was very exciting. In my next job, I went on to work for Cystic Fibrosis Canada, where I did healthcare advocacy, helping patients get access to drugs for rare disorders and newborn screening. And it was a very scientific-heavy, healthcare-based organization. And then to the Ontario Genomics Institute, where I was their manager of communications. And there I really learned, the meat and bones of communicating science and very complicated science in everyday English. So that's kind of my background. In my current capacity at Beyaert, I help clients plan for things like product launches and drugs, again, still helping patients get access to drugs for rare disorders, but still dealing with the very, the genetics-based type of information. So it's really exciting to me to be a part of teaching science to people, whether they be, in government, part of the lay audience, or in different groups like this, working with teachers or patients or whoever, to communicate complicated science in everyday English and to get people excited about it, because it really is an exciting topic. So before I start today, can I just get a show of hands? How many people are currently using social media? Yay, everyone. And how many people Facebook? Twitter? Okay, about half the room in Twitter. What about Instagram? Okay, and Snapchat? Oh, really? Interesting. That's fascinating to me. And so, are people using it? Who's using it for personal? Again, about half the room, and for business, for your job. And can I just get a couple of people to volunteer who aren't using it currently? Can somebody, volunteer? Why are you not using social media if you're not using it? Yeah.
I don't have data on my phone, so I guess I'm an antique, but I just don't want to pay for it, and I haven't found a need for it yet. So,
okay.
And that's why I'm here.
Excellent. Perfect. Anyone else? No? And why, somebody who's using social media, why are you using social media? Yes, please go ahead.
I find it's easier to keep track of what's going on because of who I'm following. It helps me stay on top of what's happening in more than one domain sometimes, which can be pretty tricky.
Yes. So my goal today is to ultimately show you a little bit about the power of social media generally. I'm going to, for the people who aren't currently using Twitter, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on Twitter syntax because it's its own language, and I find a lot of people who don't use it, the biggest barrier to entry is really understanding, this is not something that's not accessible to you. It's something that if you spend, even just a couple of hours and really learn to understand what it is that you're communicating, it becomes easy and fun. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about content and engagement, give you some tips on how you can, how you can get your message across and how you can amplify what you're trying to talk about in the space, and also some tools to save you time. So, as you know, there's a huge opportunity with social media. It's an opportunity for you to learn what's going on in the world, to learn about topics that that you weren't necessarily you wouldn't necessarily have access to before. So, for example, for me, I spent a lot of time learning about communications, about rare diseases, and about drugs, as well as about science in general, and things that I'm fascinated in. I can delve really, really deep. Now the challenge with things, for example, like Wikipedia and some of the other sources, is that they're not constantly updated, so you're not getting the late breaking news. And social media is really, really good for that. So every 60 seconds in social media, there's a lot going on. I learned earlier today that there are 2.4 million emails being sent per minute, which is pretty astounding. There are about 3,000 images being uploaded to Instagram. Some of the more wholesome platforms like YouTube, there are 2 million videos being viewed every single minute on YouTube, which is pretty phenomenal. And Canada is really, really engaged in social media. So, these stats are actually a couple of years old now. I just haven't seen more recent up-to-date stats on it. But, on average, each person in Canada watches an hour a day. I'd say it's probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours now, based on, how much that platform's grown. There are 4.8 billion Canadian Google searches performed each month. So there are people engaging, people are online, and Canadians are actually among the highest in the world. And social media can be scary, and I get that. So today we're going to talk about how not to panic. And for those of you who've used Twitter before, if there's anything that you'd like to add to any of this, feel free to jump in. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking about Twitter in general and about Twitter syntax. So what is Twitter? Is everybody familiar with what Twitter is? Yes. This is a microblogging platform. You have 140 characters. So you are trying to get people interested in what you're saying in a very, very short amount of space. It's about sharing and engaging. And all social media platforms it's not really about me telling you, to an extent it's me telling you what I'm interested in, but it's also asking you to tell me what you're interested in and asking you to engage with what I'm posting and to really, to build relationships and to share and to really build, build communities, build groups of people who are interested in similar things. So what I've done, and at my presentation that will be available for you after, at the end I've got an analysis of each of the platforms that looks like this. So it's Twitter pros and cons, Google Plus, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go through all of this for every platform, just for Twitter. But at the end of the presentation, there is an analysis of each of the different platforms so that you can take a look at it on your own time and figure out whether this is something, because we all know social media takes some time to engage in. And the idea is that you don't necessarily need to be on everything. You just need to be on what's relevant to you, what you're looking to accomplish, and the things that you're trying to achieve, as well as the audiences that you're trying to reach. So for Twitter, for example, it's fairly low cost. It doesn't cost a lot. I mean, there are Twitter ads and the promoted posts and those things that you can spend money on. But generally speaking, the cost is really time. Hashtags allow you to kind of track themes and events. So for example, at a conference, you can use a hashtag to learn what's going on, what people are saying. Also kind of aggregate the key points of the day at the end of the event. So those are some pretty exciting tools that are common across social media platforms, but really started with Twitter. It's excellent for building relationships with people outside of your network. And I'm just going to take a second to tell you about two really good friends of mine who I've actually met over Twitter. The first person was a TED speaker that I met. So he, in 2010, I believe, his name is Sebastian, he did a TED Talk that I just thought was so cool. He basically scraped a bunch of information off of the TED website, and he's a bioinformatician, so he's really good with programming and numbers and data. And he essentially reverse engineered what the perfect TED Talk was and the worst possible talk that you could ever imagine. And looked at things like, things like what people, common language they were using, common words they were using, all the way up to what color their background was and how short or long their hair was. And it's really cute and clever, so I encourage you, if you have a second, it's called Lies, Damn Lies, and Statistics. But, I found Sebastian's talk so funny and interesting. And, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll just tweet at him. So I tweeted at Sebastian and said, hey, really loved your TED Talk, just wondering what you're up to these days. At the time, I just started at the Ontario Genomics Institute, and I was really fascinated, learning that he'd come from the bioinformatics with a fairly heavy scientific background, what he was doing these days and whether or not it was at all relevant. he tweeted back at me, and we started talking over Gmail. And to this day, we Skype chat for a few hours a month. We talk about science of interest to us and things that we're excited about. We've met in person a couple of times, and we really have fostered that relationship. So, as much as it seems like people are on the other side of the world, and things are not necessarily, people are not necessarily in your local community or your local network, you can very easily reach out to those people. Similarly, I have a friend who, who's an advisor for Google, who I met in a similar fashion. We're both really interested in mobile technology and mobile health, and so we have these little geek chats, text messages, tweets, etc. That really are just about sharing the information that we find interesting and talking to each other about topics that we're passionate about. So I encourage you, not only on things like Twitter, Facebook, etc., but Twitter is one of the easier ones for this, to build those relationships and get to know people. There might be teachers in other parts of the world, in the UK or the US or wherever, that are facing similar challenges to you, but that also might be interested in very similar things in different teaching methods or similar teaching methods. You can share a lot of information that's incredibly relevant using platforms like this, and this is where the relationships can get built. So it's easy to connect with influencers, with people who are kind of thought leaders and people who are doing interesting things. It's as simple as a click to follow them. And it's a very visual and engaging media. So, you look at images, pictures, videos, etc. They kind of live on Twitter, and we'll talk about that in a second in a little bit more detail. But the idea being that you can really just, you can really see, and we talk about this in my industry as kind of putting something out there that causes, this thumb stopping. So, as you're scrolling on your phone and you catch something that's really interesting and you click to stop your thumb on whatever it is, that's the kind of content that we look, as communications professionals to promote. The cons are, it's a fairly small post size, so it's about 140 characters, well, it is 140 characters, minus truncated links and such. The syntax is challenging. Tweets don't last very long. It's an average, surprisingly, about 3 minutes a tweet before it's gone forever. So if you're posting something that's really interesting or engaging, you can post it multiple times without fear of, of tiring whoever you're talking to with it. As opposed to emailing somebody every 4 minutes with an email of the same topic. A little bit different in that regard. There's a fairly high volume, so there's about 500 million tweets each day on Twitter, and so it's easy, to get lost in the noise and to not really, keep up to date on what's going on. And I'm going to give you some tips and tools later on how you can kind of streamline some of this and things that you can do to, to kind of sort through some of that noise. Like I said, it's time consuming, and for those of us who manage multiple accounts, it's very easy to make mistakes. As I'm sure you've seen in recent media scandals, social media managers posting things that are probably a little bit less than brand favorable sometimes. So, it's not a very forgiving media in that regard. So how are people using Twitter? They're using it for, keeping up with news. They're using it for tracking keywords and information. Keeping track of celebrities, political communications, crises. The first experience that I actually had with Twitter was when the first real time I saw Twitter as the exciting platform that it could be was when the G20 summit was going on, and I was a little bit scared to go downtown Toronto because there were all the there was a lot of looting and riots and such, and I sat in my living room and watched the news on one and had 5 Twitter feeds open at the same time, kind of watching what was going on, and it was like, oh, there's a car on fire. And then 5 minutes later, the news was like, oh, there's a car on fire. So it was really fascinating to see how that kind of evolved and how real-time news in a crisis situation can get communicated. People are using it for customer service. So, banks like TD, a lot of different platforms. And actually now, 90% of the time, when I have a customer service issue, I don't call anybody, I don't email anybody, I tweet at them first. Because often you'll get a fairly quick response. And then eventually it goes to a phone call or an email or something that's a little bit more in depth. so that they can discover the nature of your issue. But I find Twitter is a very, it's a very reactive medium, so there are a lot of brands that have invested heavily in customer service there. A lot of people use it for message amplification, so to talk about what they're doing and have other people speak to that as well. And then just as general interest, right? I mean, if you're interested in cat videos, it's really easy to find cat videos. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use it if you know how. Let's talk a little bit about Twitter syntax. It's, as admittedly, if you haven't used it, it can be quite confusing. But essentially, here's the anatomy of the tweet. So you have an icon or an avatar, which is the profile picture, your account name, which is generally the person or organization's name, your @username, which is also referred to as a handle. And this is kind of your unique identifier. You could have 25, John Smiths on Twitter, probably hundreds of thousands of John Smiths on Twitter, but there will only be, one J Smith 427. And so it's kind of like a unique identifier for you relative to other users. There's a date or a timestamp when the tweet was sent. If you actually click on the date or the timestamp, it will bring you to a permanent link for that page. So you can embed tweets on websites, you can use them in a variety of ways, and this is one way that you can you get the source code to embed them. There's the text of the tweet, which is 140 characters, a link, which is a hyperlink to an external website, and a hashtag, which is a word phrase that's searchable. So if you click on the hashtag, it'll bring you to all of the references of that hashtag that have been used in a certain time period. And then there's also kind of the social actions, the retweet, what is now called like as opposed to favorite, what was called favorite at one point, and then replying to people. So this is kind of the engagement piece of it, and you can get notifications when somebody has kind of engaged with your content. So, as an example, a tweet is a message containing 140 characters. This is something that that we had tweeted when I was with OGI, talking about DNA barcodes on every species. And as you can see, the article itself came from Forbes. So I've tagged Forbes, but also Genome Canada, because they, along with OGI, had funded this research, and Biotech Canada as well. And so, this is a very interesting video that I'm not going to show in the interest of time, but